July 23, 1943, 2:37 in the morning, Major General George Smith Patton, Jr. sat alone in his command tent outside Palermo, Sicily, the greatest American tactical victory of the war so far. His 7th Army had just captured the city in a lightning campaign that shocked even his own superiors. Newspapers back home were calling him a genius. Eisenhower had sent congratulations. The men were celebrating outside. But inside this canvas tent, illuminated only by a single kerosene lamp, the most aggressive general in the American Army had his head in his hands. And he was weeping not from joy, from something far darker. Today we reveal what broke George Patton that night, and why the cost of glory haunted him for the rest of his life. George Smith Patton, Jr., 57 years old, commander of the United States 7th Army, was everything the American public wanted in a warrior general. Tall, commanding presence, ivory-handled revolvers on his hips, perfectly tailored uniform. He spoke in profanity-laced tirades that inspired his men and terrified his subordinates. He had studied warfare his entire life, fought in Mexico with Pershing, led tanks in World War I, trained armored divisions in the California desert. Now in July 1943, he finally had his chance to prove what he had always believed: that aggressive, bold action wins wars, that speed and violence of action overwhelm any defense, that the American Army could match any military force in the world if led correctly. But proving this theory would cost him something he never expected to pay: his conscience. The Sicily campaign began July 10th, 1943. Operation Husky, the largest amphibious invasion in history up to that point, 160,000 Allied troops hitting the beaches of southern Sicily. The strategic goal was opening the Mediterranean to Allied shipping, knocking Italy out of the war, and preparing for eventual invasion of mainland Europe. The tactical command structure put British General Harold Alexander in overall ground command, with 2 army commanders beneath him: Bernard Montgomery commanding British 8th Army on the eastern coast driving toward Messina, and George Patton commanding American 7th Army with the supporting mission of protecting Montgomery's left flank and rear areas. This command arrangement infuriated Patton. He was 57 years old. Montgomery was 55. Both were experienced aggressive commanders. But Alexander, following British military tradition and honestly doubting American combat effectiveness after Kasserine Pass, gave the glory mission to Montgomery and the supporting role to Patton. Montgomery's plan was straightforward: drive up the eastern coast highway, break through German defenses at Catania, race to Messina at the island's northeastern tip, capture the port before Germans could evacuate, trap entire Axis force on Sicily, win the campaign. Simple, direct, bold, exactly the kind of plan Patton would have proposed if given the lead role, but Montgomery got bogged down immediately. The German Hermann Göring Panzer Division and 15th Panzer Grenadier Division established defensive positions in the volcanic terrain around Mount Etna. The terrain was perfect for defense: narrow valleys, high ridges, limited roads. Montgomery's advance slowed to crawl, casualties mounted, the timetable collapsed, and Patton watched from the western flank, seething with frustration. On July 17th, 1 week into the campaign, Patton saw his opportunity. Western Sicily was lightly defended, most German forces concentrated against Montgomery. Italian coastal divisions in the west were demoralized, under-equipped, and eager to surrender. Palermo, Sicily's capital and largest city, sat on the northwestern coast essentially undefended. It had no strategic value in reaching Messina. It was actually in the opposite direction from the objective. But it had something Patton valued even more than strategic importance. It had political and propaganda significance. Whoever captured Palermo would dominate the headlines, and Patton was not going to let Montgomery have all the glory. Patton called Eisenhower, his friend, his superior, the man who had given him this command, despite Patton's abrasive personality and political liabilities. Eisenhower was in Algiers, coordinating the entire Mediterranean theater. Patton made his pitch. "Ike, Western Sicily is wide open. I can take Palermo in 72 hours. Imagine the headlines. Sicily's capital in American hands. We prove the American Army can move fast and hit hard. It's a gift. We have to take it." Eisenhower hesitated. This deviated from Alexander's plan. It directed American forces away from supporting Montgomery rather than toward the objective of Messina. But Eisenhower also understood American public opinion needed a victory, needed to see their army succeed, needed heroes. So he approved. "George, you have 72 hours. Take Palermo. Then get back to supporting the main effort toward Messina. And for God's sake, don't make this about beating Monty to the headlines." Patton smiled, hung up the phone, and immediately violated the spirit of those instructions. July 18th, Patton launched his offensive. He committed 3 divisions: the 3rd Infantry Division under Lucian Truscott, the 2nd Armored Division under Hugh Gaffey, and elements of the 82nd Airborne Division. His orders were brutally simple: maximum speed, ignore your flanks, bypass resistance, drive straight for Palermo, no stopping, no consolidating, no waiting for supply lines to catch up. Just speed, pure speed, overwhelm the enemy through velocity and shock. Truscott, who would later become one of America's finest corps commanders, executed the plan perfectly. His infantry mounted on trucks and tanks advanced 100 miles in 72 hours. Italian units surrendered by the thousands, not because they were defeated in battle, but because they could not retreat fast enough. Patton's armored columns were moving faster than Italian soldiers could march. The 3rd Infantry Division captured 44,000 prisoners. The 2nd Armored Division overran supply dumps, airfields, and coastal batteries. It was the fastest American advance of the entire war up to that point. It exceeded even Patton's expectations, and the press loved it. But speed has a price that accountants measure in casualty reports. Patton's orders to bypass resistance and maintain speed meant that small German and Italian rearguards holding key terrain were engaged by leading American elements, then bypassed when they couldn't be taken quickly. This left small unit actions scattered across western Sicily, infantry companies assaulting hilltop positions, tank platoons fighting for bridge crossings, battalion-sized battles for towns whose names appeared in casualty lists but never in newspapers. Places like Caltanissetta, where 47 Americans died taking a crossroads that had no strategic value. Montgomery, where 31 soldiers were killed assaulting positions that surrendered the next day when surrounded. Villalba, San Cataldo, Serradefalco, each a small engagement lasting a few hours, each costing 20, 30, 50 American lives, each bypassed in the official histories because they didn't affect the campaign's outcome, but each recorded in morning reports and casualty telegrams sent to mothers and wives back home. On July 22nd, 4 days after launching the offensive, 1 day past Eisenhower's 72-hour deadline, Patton's tanks rolled into Palermo. Crowds of Sicilian civilians lined the streets cheering. Italian soldiers surrendered en masse. American flags were raised over the Norman Palace. War correspondents took photographs that would appear on front pages across America. Patton stood in his jeep, ivory-handled pistols gleaming, accepting the adulation. This was his moment, his vindication, proof that American armor could move as fast and hit as hard as any German panzer division, proof that aggressive leadership won battles, proof that George Patton deserved to be mentioned alongside Rommel and Montgomery as one of the war's great commanders. That evening, Patton held a dinner for his senior officers. Italian wine liberated from local merchants, toasts to the 7th Army, speeches about American fighting spirit. Patton stood and addressed his commanders. "Gentlemen, you have proven that the American Army can fight and win. You have made history. You have shown the world that we are not the amateur soldiers our enemies believed we were after Kasserine. You have given our nation a victory when it desperately needed one. I am proud to command you." The officers cheered. More toasts followed. Patton excused himself around midnight, returned to his command tent, told his aides he wanted to review the next day's operations, and asked not to be disturbed. Captain Richard Jensen, Patton's aide-de-camp, was organizing personnel reports in the adjacent tent when he heard Patton's voice. At first he thought the general was on the phone, then realized he was talking to himself. Jensen froze, listening. Years later he would write in his diary, published posthumously in 1978, what he heard that night. Patton was saying, 273 killed, 273 American soldiers dead, 940 wounded for what? To beat Montgomery to a headline? To capture a city with no strategic value? To feed my goddamned ego? There was silence. Then Patton continued. Montgomery, 47 dead. I ordered that assault because the town was on the direct route. We could have bypassed it, isolated it, taken it without casualties. But that would have added 6 hours to the advance. 6 hours I wasn't willing to give because I needed to make Eisenhower's 72-hour deadline. 47 mothers will get telegrams because I needed to prove I was faster than Monty. Jensen moved quietly toward the tent entrance. Through a gap in the canvas, he could see Patton sitting at his field desk. Casualty reports spread across the map of Sicily. The general had his head in his hands. His shoulders were shaking. Jensen realized with shock that Patton was crying, not silent tears, but deep sobs. The man who cultivated an image of absolute fearlessness, who wore pistols and profanity like armor, who never showed weakness or doubt in front of his men, was breaking down alone in his tent at 2:37 in the morning. Jensen withdrew silently, never spoke of what he saw, never mentioned it in official reports, only recorded it in his personal diary decades later. What broke George Patton that night in Palermo was not the danger he had faced, not the stress of command, not exhaustion or battle fatigue. It was the realization that he had prioritized personal glory over the lives of his men. He had chosen the fast route over the safe route. He had ordered attacks on positions that could have been bypassed or isolated. He had pushed his units beyond reasonable limits of endurance, not because the mission required it, but because his ego demanded it, because he needed to beat Montgomery to the headlines, because he wanted to prove he was a great commander. And 273 American soldiers paid for his ambition with their lives. This was the cost of glory that Patton never anticipated, the weight of command that no amount of military study or tactical brilliance could prepare him for, the knowledge that every decision he made measured in human lives, and that sometimes those lives were spent not on military necessity, but on personal ambition. If this story is pulling you in, hit that like button right now and subscribe, because what happens next makes Patton's internal crisis even more complicated. 2 weeks after Palermo, he would slap a soldier suffering from shell shock, nearly ending his career. Some historians believe that incident was connected to his emotional breakdown in Palermo, that Patton's fury at the hospitalized soldier was actually fury at himself for sending men into unnecessary danger, that he was projecting his own guilt onto a soldier showing weakness. But that's another story. For now, we need to understand what happened after that night in the tent. The next morning, July 23rd, Patton emerged from his tent at 0600 hours, perfectly composed, uniform immaculate, manner confident and aggressive. He met with his commanders, issued orders for the advance toward Messina, showed no sign of the previous night's breakdown. His staff noticed nothing unusual. The 7th Army continued operations, driving eastward along Sicily's northern coast toward the ultimate objective. On August 17th, elements of Patton's 3rd Division entered Messina just hours before Montgomery's forces arrived from the south. Patton had won his race, secured his headlines, proven his point about aggressive American leadership, but the cost of that victory stayed with him in his diary, which remained sealed until 1974. Patton wrote multiple entries about Sicily. One dated August 25, 1943 reads, "I pray that those who died in my haste to glory will forgive me. I pray their families never know that their sons died for my vanity, rather than their country's necessity. I carry them with me. I will carry them until I die. This is the price of command that no one tells you about, that no academy prepares you for, that you only understand when you're standing over the morning reports counting names." Eisenhower never knew about Patton's breakdown. At least no record suggests he did. He continued to value Patton as his most aggressive and effective battlefield commander, used him to lead 3rd Army across France in 1944, relied on him to relieve Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge. But Eisenhower also grew increasingly concerned about Patton's stability, the slapping incidents in Sicily, the inflammatory speeches, the constant need for recognition and publicity. Perhaps Eisenhower sensed that something had changed in Patton during Sicily, that the man who emerged from that campaign was carrying a burden that made him more reckless, more aggressive, more desperate to justify the costs his ambition had already paid. Erwin Rommel, the German commander Patton obsessed over his entire career, never knew about his American rival's emotional crisis. By July 1943, Rommel had been recalled from North Africa, was serving in Italy preparing coastal defenses. He and Patton never faced each other directly in battle, which remained one of Patton's great regrets. But the irony is that Rommel had experienced his own version of Patton's Palermo moment in North Africa after Kasserine Pass. Rommel had pushed his Africa corps beyond sustainable limits pursuing British forces, lost men and equipment in pursuit operations that gained nothing, wrote in his own diary about the cost of ambition and the weight of casualties incurred for attacks that failed. In some ways, Patton and Rommel were mirror images, aggressive commanders driven by need for glory, both grappling with the human cost of their tactical boldness, both carrying ghosts of men who died in pursuit of objectives that mattered more to the generals than to the strategic outcome. The truth about Patton's tears in Palermo remained hidden until Captain Jensen's diary was published in 1978, 33 years after Patton's death in December 1945 from injuries sustained in a car accident in Germany. The revelation changed historical understanding of Patton, adding complexity to a figure often portrayed in simple terms as either aggressive hero or reckless glory hound. The reality was more nuanced. Patton was a brilliant tactical commander who understood armored warfare better than almost anyone in the American Army. He was also a deeply flawed human being whose need for recognition sometimes overrode his judgment. He was capable of inspiring tremendous loyalty and affection from his men, while simultaneously making decisions that cost those same men their lives unnecessarily. And he was aware of this contradiction, tortured by it, unable to reconcile his ambition with his conscience. Today, military historians study Patton's Sicily campaign as example of both brilliant mobile warfare and cautionary tale about prioritizing operational art over strategic necessity. The advance to Palermo is taught at staff colleges as example of rapid exploitation of enemy weakness. But it's also discussed in ethics courses as case study in command responsibility and the moral weight of casualties. Patton's tears in that tent represent something rarely acknowledged in military history, that great commanders carry psychological burden of their decisions, that victory measured in headlines and territory comes with cost measured in morning reports and casualty telegrams, that glory and guilt are often inseparable in war. George Patton died believing he had been a great commander whose aggressive tactics shortened the war and saved lives in the long run by defeating Germany more quickly. He also died carrying the weight of specific individuals whose deaths he knew were attributable not to military necessity but to his personal ambition. 273 names from Sicily, others from later campaigns, soldiers who died because their commander chose speed over caution, boldness over prudence, glory over safety. This was the price Patton paid for being Patton, the cost he accepted, the burden he carried, and the reason he cried alone in his tent after his greatest victory. Because sometimes winning looks like triumph from the outside but feels like failure from the inside. Sometimes the cost of glory is measured in tears shed in private by men who can never show weakness in public, and sometimes the most aggressive warriors are the ones most haunted by the consequences of their aggression.